Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome here in the Blauwe Zaal to this Studium Generale lecture, The Right to Protest. There is a lot to do about protests in the world at the moment, and I'm not surprised to see such a big turnout. It's interesting to see that like 100 of you signed up in the last few days. Usually it's a bit more gradual, and I can imagine that has to do with the current events. It was less than 2 weeks ago that in The Hague, an anti-immigration protest escalated in violence. It was also less than 2 weeks ago that both Trump and the Dutch government were taking on executive orders and motions to designate Antifa, the anti-fascist movement, so to say, as a domestic terrorist organization, which could also have repercussions for protest rights. And it's been, the last recent years have been seen a number of protests skyrocket. So it's different than, let's say, before the COVID pandemic. Just to see who we have with us here today, I'm always curious to get to know you a little bit. Who of you have ever been to a protest? I would say that's about a third of you. And if you're willing to share, who of you has ever been in contact with law enforcement during a protest? Okay, that's also like maybe 10, 15 of you. Interesting. We have Q&A as well after that if you want to maybe discuss that more with our speaker. But with all this going on, our right to protest is increasingly under pressure. Even though the ability to express ourselves and make our voice heard is a vital part of our democracy. To learn more about the history of protests and especially about the current legal framework surrounding protests, we have invited human rights lawyer Jelle Klaas. He has years of experience with strategic human rights litigation in the Netherlands, and he is the founder and executive director of PILP, which stands for Public Interest Litigation Project. He is here to tell us more today about our right to protest in turbulent times. So please join me in welcoming Jelle Klaas.
Yes, great to be here. Thank you all for attending. I only have 25 minutes and I love to talk for hours about this topic. So I'll try to be brief. So that also means that, I will be a bit too black and white on some topics. But we have some room for discussion and Q&A. And after the time, I will also be here with a colleague. So every further questions or legal advice that you want will be here. What's already said, I'm Jelle Klaas. I'm a human rights lawyer for the past 21 years and director at PILP. And I specialize in human rights in the Netherlands, socio-economic human rights, and especially a lot of right to protest cases. So I work for PILP. We are a law firm in the Netherlands based in Amsterdam, and we're also a foundation. So that makes us a little bit different than most of the other law firms in the Netherlands. And we do strategic litigation and movement lawyering. Well, I can tell you again hours about that, but no time. So we provide strategic legal advice to communities, to NGOs, to all types of activists and citizens. And we do bigger political public interest cases. In private and civil law cases like the right to water case for children that we did for Defense for Children and the racial profiling, ethnic profiling case, well, and a lot of those types of cases. But I will not be talking about those because I'm here for the right to protest. So for the past 20 years as a lawyer, I've helped activists and citizens and groups in advising them on right to protest issues. And since we started PILP in 2014, the majority of our advices and cases are on the right to protest. These are just a few screenshots that I tried to paste into a PowerPoint of our website on cases that we did. One of them is in St. Maarten, where we did a case on a ban on the right to protest. Well, so a lot about that. And I thought I'm going to tell you a little about what the framework is and how it works, because that's useful as a citizen to know what is your right to protest and how can you make use of it. But I thought let's start with why should you care? And of course, first of all, you all know the right to protest is a constitutional and a human right, but that in itself doesn't mean you should care. I mean, rule of law thinking it should, but I think it's more important to address why you should care. And it's important to tell you that this right to protest, even though we say it's a constitutional right, it's not in our constitution. It flows from our constitutional right to the freedom of assembly. So the right to gather with a group of people and talk about stuff that you care about in public. And I think it's interesting to mention that this right we only have since about half of the 19th century. So if you were a group of concerned citizens in, say, 1821 in the city of Eindhoven, and you wanted to gather with 30 people, you needed a permit from the government. Because you wanted to talk about politics or anything that concerned you, you had to ask, please, government, can we convene with a group of 30 people to discuss the things that we care about? And you can see that that's linked to the freedom of speech, because if you have to ask for permission to gather with a group of people and the government can say yes or no, there's a strong link to that, and I will get back to that. But I think the most important thing that I want to stress is that this fundamental right is not only important for the people that want to protest. So if you are very concerned about something, say an ongoing genocide in Gaza, or the government want to cut all the trees in the park in your neighborhood, or something that you want to voice your opinion about, of course you want to do that. You want to make use of that right. So it's a fundamental importance for yourself. But it's also important for all others, because other people who might not yet be concerned about this right yet, you want to make them know that you care. It's a very important tool to tell other people in society, hey, we think this is very important and you should care too. And if they don't care, they can at least see that there's a group of people that is concerned about this. And also for authorities and the democratic rule of law and democratic society, say for instance you have a group of people that wants to legalize sexual conduct between minors and adults. There is a group of people that wants to say, we want to completely make that legal again. The majority of people will think that's an awful opinion, we shouldn't do that. But the fact that these people go to the street, it's useful for everyone to see, hey, apparently there's a group of people that want this, and look, there are these 3 or 4 sad white guys, and apparently they're the only ones who want this. So I think for a democratic society, it's good to see how many people are voicing that opinion and how that is also shifting. Because if you see that 100,000 people take to the streets because they want the government to take action against a genocide in Gaza, you would assume that parliament or government or other people would think, okay, something is going on here. There is a shift in political opinion in our citizens, and you can do something with that, yes or no. So it's just as important as the right to vote. Well, why? Because if you vote, it's only once every 4 years or more often, as we've seen in the Netherlands for the last few years. This is the only tool that we have next to the right to vote to voice our opinion, to make others and the government know, hey, we care about something. So it's very important that we have that. If this is taken away or it's heavily infringed, we cannot make our voices heard. Whatever these voices are, right wing, left wing, middle, whatever you want to voice, this is your only core fundamental right to do that. Like was mentioned before, we've seen a huge increase in protests in the Netherlands. I've been involved in these movements and as a lawyer, like I said, for quite a long time. And especially the last 15 years, we've seen a huge increase of people protesting on a huge range of political issues, from the right to the left, on a lot of different topics. And these people bump into authorities, and we see that there's also a lot of discussion about this right, and that these rights are under pressure. We've seen a lot of court cases and verdicts where judges and European experts say this right is under pressure and it's being violated. Okay, so I'm talking about a protest. What is a protest according to the law? And then, well, let's just try to shout a little bit. I need 4 elements to make this when you can talk about a protest according to the law. Can you mention one element that you need to say, hey, this is a protest? Yeah, just shout. Yeah, a topic to protest about. So there's something special about a topic. What is, if I want to go on the street and I want people to buy more Coca-Cola or Pepsi, there could be a protest, but more often than not, it's not. So what is specific on that topic? Yeah, controversial, or it has to fall under the freedom of speech. Sorry. Also because of time, so it has to be about something that is political or falls under the protection of the freedom of speech. And buying more Coca-Cola, generally speaking, does not fall under that protection, although I can imagine specific situations where it could. 3 other elements. So it has to be about a topic that is political, falls under freedom of speech. Other elements. A lot of people. What is a lot? Give me a number. At least 20? 2 or more? Yeah, do I have anything in between? No. So it's indeed 2 or more. There are countries like Spain where it's 20 plus. So under the 20, you don't have a right to, you don't fall under the protection of the right to protest. But according to the European Court and also in the Netherlands, it's 2 or more. And I'll be getting into this in a minute. So that's 2 or more people about a topic under the protection of freedom of speech. I need 2 other things. A public place. And what is a public place? You can have a lot of debate, but if you protest generally in my home, it will not fall under the protection of the right to protest, although there can be some exceptions to that. But generally speaking, a public place. So that's a place that is publicly accessible. So that can also be, in some instances, a station, a university, a hospital. We just published a report about what public means in the right to protest on our website. Then I need one final element. Yeah? Non-violent. So if I go for my protest and I bring my Kalashnikovs and Molotov cocktails, even though I would want to voice my opinion and just try to convince others, it does not fall under the right to protest anymore. And I think what is peaceful, because that's a thing, again, we can have a discussion for an hour about that, and maybe in the Q&A we can get a little bit into that when talking about the fascists in the Malieveld and the other protesters, and how does that relate to each other in a minute. So, very quickly, there are a lot of different forms for a protest. It's a march, or it can be static, so people standing, like, well, in Dutch it's a manifestation. A blockade and an occupation can also fall under the right to protest protection. And yeah, again, this is one of the things I really think is interesting. A one-person protest is not a protest under the law. So that's complicated, because if you have a really good topic, and you're standing there, and one person walks along and says, oh, I so agree with you, then the minute that person stands still next to you, it's a protest. Why does it matter? Because if you are standing there as a person alone, you fall under the freedom of speech, and it's more difficult for the government to restrict your freedom of speech. So I will get back to that in a second, but the right to protest, the government can restrict it under certain instances. But if you're standing alone, why am I showing this? Ik ben geen onderdaan. We've seen this a lot with individuals that protested against the monarchy, and they were holding up one placard, and they were all arrested a few years after each other. And the courts kept telling the government, you cannot arrest people under the right to protest if they stand there alone. They're only making use of their freedom of speech. All right, so very important, related to what I just said, because it's such a fundamental right, and it's not only in your interest, but in the interest of society as a whole, it's just as important as the right to vote. That means that the authorities have to facilitate it. So it's not like that they say, okay, we grant you a protest, or it's like, it's a right, and they have to actively make sure that you can voice your opinion in a protest. So if it's a very big protest, they could even have to supply enough toilets, or make sure that you have electricity for the making sure that everyone can be reached. They have to close off the roads so that everyone can march through it. And this is a very important one. Other very important points of the right to protest is that you have the right to be within sight and sound of the topic that you are protesting for or against. So if you are protesting against the racist caricature of Black Pete, you have the right to be within sight and sound of that parade and of the racist part of that parade. The government can restrict it and say you have to be static, so you have to stay in one place so that we contain it a little bit more, but you have the right to do that. And a counter-protest is a protest too. So if there is a protest of a group and you are very much against it, you have the right to do that too, within sight and sound of the group that you're protesting against, and the government should facilitate both protests. Because again, for a healthy, democratic rule of law society, it is good that citizens can get to the streets and voice their opinions, and not bash each other's heads in. So the government, the authorities, and I'll be getting there in a second, who we are then talking about, can never restrict the content of a protest. Yeah? So, and that has to do with censorship, because if you say to the government, I want to protest, even if you would argue in a crazy way, I want to protest, celebrate the birthday of Hitler, and I want to bring all my Nazi friends together and show swastika flags and stuff, that protest, if you would do that, would violate several criminal acts, but the fact that you announce it to the government, on that content, the authorities cannot ban it. Yeah? So what would happen, very important that even opinions that many people would disagree with, that are hurtful or that would provoke violent reactions, are protected by the right to protest. And you could and should argue, especially those protests of opinions that you really hate, you as a citizen should say, but they do have the right to protest. And we should fully stand for that, because maybe tomorrow you will be voicing an opinion that the majority really hates, and then you also want to make use of that. So a protester is not allowed to commit crimes, of course. So if I do get there with all these Nazis and the swastikas, the moment that you unroll the swastikas, the police can arrest you for a hate crime. Yeah? So, but then it's something that you have done during a protest, just as if you would have done it while shopping in a shopping mall, that they can only act after that has happened. Very, very, very important, and we keep on seeing the police and municipalities make mistakes here. Also for the people in the back, no permits ever. Geen vergunning. It's not something that falls within the right to protest. You want to voice your opinion, you have that right. You decide where you want to do that, how you want to do that, and you have to notify the authorities. Een kennisgeving in Dutch. So you notify them, listen, in this case the mayor, we want to protest on that and that square, on that and that topic, and then with what I said before, the government should try to facilitate that as much as possible. If you don't notify, so if you just stand there with a group or it's a spontaneous protest, officially that's a criminal offense. That's problematic, also in violation of European human rights. But judges and the Nationale Ombudsman have said that to not notify does not in itself give the authorities enough ground to disband the protest. And so if you don't notify, that's a strategic or tactical choice for protesters to do. As a lawyer, I would always argue, try to notify if you can, because if they restrict your protest, we can help you with litigation. I will get back to that. So the mayor, this is the mayor of Amsterdam, takes a decision on your protest. So you notify them and they write a decision, and that decision can contain restrictions. Sometimes you get an email by the police saying, hey, we checked it with the mayor, and they say, go, have fun, and no problem. But sometimes they can give you restrictions, and I'll get to the restrictions in a minute. You when you get the decision depends on when you notified and how fast the government is working. Most of the times you get it about a week before your protest. So if they then restrict your protests very heavily, yeah, you have to fight that. You can do that administratively by yourself with an appeal, een bezwaar. But you sometimes also have to ask for an immediate measure, a voorlopige voorziening, by going to court right away because you want to get a decision before the protest takes place. Well, all this nerdy legal stuff, I'm more than happy to answer questions about that, but just know that if they restrict it, you can fight these restrictions with the mayor and also in court, sometimes even before. They cannot just restrict it because they think, I don't like your protest, or because we've seen in the city of, well, one of the bigger cities in the Netherlands, that the mayor said, I don't want shopping people to be annoyed by your protest. Well, that's not a valid restriction. The restriction has to be necessary in a democratic society and has to be proportionate. So they have to show that this restriction is absolutely necessary, and it has to be linked to one of the conditions, safety, traffic, health, and the rights of others, and to prevent or control disorderly conducts. So when the mayor restricts your protest, they really have to show why it's absolutely necessary and where they base this in the law. I'm just showing you a few. So the majority of the cases that we do with PILP is fight these restrictions. And then you have to think about a ban on facial covering. They don't want you to cover your face. A restriction of location. You want to protest at the city square. They send you to this industrial terrain. The amount of protesters, you can protest, but only 50, but you want to bring in 500. You have to mandatory clean up after your protest. This is a very problematic one that we keep on seeing again and again. A whole protest ban. We're doing a big case against the city of Amsterdam that banned all protests for a whole week last year after the Maccabi Tel Aviv stuff in Amsterdam. All protests on all topics were banned, and that's well, quite an issue. A ban on shocking, harmful, or provocative statements, which is directly linked to the content of your protest, so a very problematic ban. And restrictions on the sound volume, which is also an interesting one. We keep on seeing it. And we just did a case on no singing and no poems at your protest, because then it would look too much like an event. Well, that's the city of Heerlen that did this. Not pointing fingers, but pointing fingers. All right. So, like I said, it's the mayor, is the competent authority that decides. So the mayor of Eindhoven decides before it takes place. Then during the protest, it is the police. They deal with criminal behavior during the protest. And the driehoek, the mayor, the public attorney, and the police deal with public disorders during the protest. And also, when it really goes wrong in a protest, they can decide to disband it. Very quickly, in the last few minutes that I have left, civil disobedience, very interesting topic, can talk for an hour. A lot going on that, but I'll just briefly mention it. Civil disobedience is a protest where the law is deliberately broken. Yeah, so you sit on a highway and you know that you're not allowed to sit there, but you do it because you want to make a point. But it's still covered by the human right to protest. So even as long as you don't use violence and bring your Kalashnikovs and stuff like that, if you occupy a university, for instance, it still falls within the right to protest. But if laws are broken, like at a certain point when you occupy a university building, some laws will be broken, you have these two things happening next to each other. So you still fall within the protection of the human right to protest, but you're also violating lower laws, and you can be prosecuted for that. But when you are occupying a highway or occupying a university because you have a bachelor party and you just want to have fun, it's very different if you do it for that reason or if you want to voice your opinion for something that is very relevant to others and falls within the protection of the freedom of speech. So if you do it for fighting for human rights, the authorities have to de-escalate and respond proportionately. They shouldn't go in swinging the batons right away. And courts should take the human rights into account when you get sentenced. So you can get a fine, you can get prison, you can get prosecuted for civil disobedience, but the judges have to take into account whether you did this for some bachelor party or for fighting within the right to protest. I'm just mentioning it out. We have a lot of reports on our website on the right to protest at university. What does that mean? What does it entail? I'm not inciting you to protest at universities. I'm also not saying not to do it. I'm just saying there are a lot of arguments on if you want to do it, how to do it, and what legal arguments can you bump into. And with that, that's it for now. Hope you have a lot of questions, and I hope you like this presentation.